Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode, we're going to be detailing, basically something that has been part of our political discourse for a while now, and something that might have actually changed in a lot of people's minds ever since it was first created. Before we get into that, let's go over the shout-out for today. Today's shout-out is coming from Progressum TV. I'm shouting them out because it doesn't take too long for them to surpass me, so this is my last chance to give them a shout-out. They have 697 subs. Basically, they do, I don't know if it's stream posts, but they basically go over certain topics. The first video that you get when you look them up is Chomsky getting Ukraine war horribly wrong. Cristobal gets destroyed by AOC and Ilham Omar. Basically, they go over the whatever news and drama stuff is going on. They're pretty alright for what they are, and I think you should give them a couple of subs. Make it so that they surpass me. Actually, please don't. Get me to 800, and then you can get them to 700. Let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be talking about an update on the Philippine election, because it finally just happened, and lo and behold, shock of all shocks, Bongbong Marcos won. And it seems that the first thing that he's going to try and do is basically try to wipe out the debt that his family owes from stealing billions of dollars from the Philippines. Honestly, there isn't much else more to say. The next story is coming from Peru, and this is a pretty bad situation for Peru. See, it turns out that the incumbent government's party, Peru Libre, has had a decent number of their members resign from the party. Many of their legislators have decided that they're going to leave the party and continue basically as independents. Now, that's just another line in the fall of Pedro Castillo. But there's actually one part of the fall that I actually ended up missing. You see, what happened was that basically his party has actually pushed forth I don't know if it was a bill or a resolution, but basically they've pushed something that essentially calls for Castillo to resign so they can hold new elections in 2023. The situation in Peru has gotten so bad that they are literally okay, scrap Castillo, let's try something new. And many people are saying that would probably just benefit the right wing. So I don't know if they're just going to have to just power through Castillo and hope that maybe things turn around. If not, oh well, we'll have to wait and see what happens then. Speaking of things that we don't have to wait about, apparently something very controversial happened in Israel. Wow, shocker. Okay, so what happened in Israel was that a Palestinian journalist by the name of Shireen Abu Akleh was shot by the Israeli military while she was covering some issues that were going on with the Israeli military. And the Israeli military claimed that she was quote-unquote armed with a camera, which, if that doesn't make the situation look even more dire, then that's literally just our U.S. military and police state. You have a camera. Oh no, you're gonna catch us doing bad things. But then the story got a little more interesting when a funeral was held for Shireen. You see, while the funeral was being held, the Israeli military basically broke up the funeral and literally was pushing the people who were holding her casket. Yikes, it's getting very, very hard for people to actually try and make any sort of apologetics for the situation at this point. And at this point, there really isn't much else I can really add to the situation, just that this stinks and this is an apartheid state, and we should try and fix that. Okay, so the next story is coming from Latin America. You see, turns out there's a little bit of a controversy. You see, one thing that has that's scheduled to come up is the Summit of the Americas. However, the Summit of the Americas is having a little bit of controversy because the U.S., who is in charge of the Summit of the Americas, has decided that Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela will not be invited, because the whole point of the Summit of the Americas is to quote-unquote showcase democracy in the hemisphere. And in response, AMLO, the president of Mexico, has stated that he will not be attending the event in protest, stating nobody should exclude anybody. Instead, Ebrard will be attending in his place, and he will then be using this opportunity to try and make it so that the U.S. will lift the embargo on Cuba. I say, good on him. Like, one of the things that a lot of people have been pointing out is that they're trying to make it so that Latin America has more of a, like, united front, like, towards the United States. Basically, so that they can stand on their own 2 feet, as opposed to just simply relying on the United States entirely. Many Latin American countries are breaking their ties with the IMF and the OAS, or just flat out not paying their dues, like basically still being a part but not paying whatever they need to pay, just so they can assert authority. We'll have to wait and see how this development plays. But here's another development regarding Latin America. Apparently, some House Democrats are urging Joe Biden to lift the sanctions on Venezuela. A group of 18 House progressives have sent a letter to Joe Biden urging him to lift all sanctions against Venezuela that exacerbate the humanitarian situation in the country. The leaders of the charge are Raul Grijalva and Jesus Chua Garcia, but it includes a lot of other members of the House, like the Squad and, basically a lot of other people in that progressive orbit. And I don't know if this is necessarily the case, but I think the fact that Grijalva and Chua are the ones who are leading the charge might also be a little bit of what I'm saying beforehand, like Latin America trying to assert its own, like, authority. Maybe I'm just reading too much into this, and it's just literally they're progressive, so they would be against economic sanctions of this kind. Then again, it might be a little bit of both. Based Chua Garcia, speaking of something that's not based, we have something that never happens in the United States. A far-right white boy killed a bunch of people. Oh my god, I've never seen this a million times before. Okay, so the situation is that in Buffalo, New York, an 18-year-old white kid who was radicalized on 4chan and the like went to a supermarket and shot up a bunch of people. But wait, there's more. He also live streamed what he did on Twitch and wrote a 100-plus page manifesto and posted it online, basically explaining the whole situation. Now, of course, I could go on to explain, like, this is a bad thing and unfortunate, which we all know, but also we should probably go into a little bit of why this happened. Yes, as I said before, this person was extremely radicalized on the internet, but one name that popped up occasionally and got into a little bit of a heated argument about was people talking about Kyle Rittenhouse a lot during this. Some people got really mad when you would even attempt to compare Rittenhouse to this person, even though the comparisons are pretty obvious. They shot people for one, they were white for another. They also seem to forget the other part of comparisons where you also talk about the differences. For example, to my knowledge, Rittenhouse was not like some white supremacist whatever. My simple argument was that the normalization of the vigilante justice that Rittenhouse did partially played a factor. Is it the sole factor? No. Obviously, there are tons of other factors that were put into play. He was praised as like this hero, like Rittenhouse did it. He fought to protect our property. Like, they idealized him to such a high level. And to people like the shooter here, they'll look at this idealized version and then view something completely different than what was being said. I made the comparisons to, like, people who idealized the Ruby Ridge situation or the Waco siege. You can sit there all day long talking about how, what they did at Waco was bad or what they did at Ruby Ridge was bad, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the idealized image that was taken from those incidents. Timothy McVeigh would then take what happened in those two situations and then do the Oklahoma City bombing. And a similar thing might have been put in play for this person. Again, is it the sole factor? Absolutely not. But it is part of the issue, whether directly or indirectly. If Rittenhouse was publicly put on well, not publicly put on trial, he was publicly put on trial, but like publicly put to a sentence, then maybe this person might not have been pushed to commit the crime because they'd fully grasp that maybe this might not be worth it. But then again, you could argue, given who they were ideologically, maybe it probably wouldn't have been enough. So anyways, the last story, we're going to be talking about copyright law, because it seems that copyright has gone back into the discourse for the worst reasons that you can think. Okay, so Josh Hawley has introduced a measure to strip Disney of their copyright protections. Basically, he plans to make a bill called the Copyright Clause Restoration Act, which would limit copywritten material to 56 years, and not only that, he would apply the new rule retroactively, meaning that all the companies that have long-standing properties already will lose said copyright protections. Like, if this bill hypothetically gets passed, Mickey Mouse immediately enters the public domain. So too does Captain America, Superman, and all these other characters. Now, this bill is, of course, very conflicting, because on one end, people are like, I mean, I was literally like, I made an observation of it in a forum post where I was like, based, and then inner dialogue me says, wait, but this would mean that Disney would view the woke characters as the bad thing. And I'm like, okay, I retract my based. Again, this is the whole thing. Republicans are going to magically pretend that they care about all these other issues, when really the only issue they care about is like, oh, they hate the gays and transes, so that's what they think is going to fix the issue. Like, they're only doing, like think about it. Wasn't until Disney started doing all this stuff that Republicans are even thinking about doing this. I hope that this doesn't dupe anybody. Like, I hope that this actually doesn't come to a vote and then Democrats vote for it, because this is really just like a Republican trap, really. This is literally like the Republicans like trying to get people to admit like, oh, the woke characters are a problem, when they have to exist before they become a problem, and even then there wouldn't be an issue. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. Russiagate. Oh boy, depending on who you are, you've probably not heard the name Russiagate in a while now. I sure wish I haven't heard that in a while, but unfortunately, it seems to still be a thing to some people. For those who really do not know what this is, I first have to explain the timeline. You see, this is a thing that started becoming a thing in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 election, and basically kind of went away during the 2020 election. It supposedly disappeared then, but that was basically the general time frame of this. But to some people, it's still around. Now, let's go. Now that I've given you a bit of a timeline, what the heck is Russiagate? You got the time frame, but what is this thing? Well, to be point blank, I don't know. Depending on who you ask, the definition of Russiagate can be something completely different. First, some people say that Russiagate was the investigation into supposed links between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Then, the other one said that Russiagate was allegations that Russians gave WikiLeaks the information on the DNC. Then, Russiagate was also the allegations that Russia bolstered the candidacies of Trump, Bernie, and Jill Stein to hurt Hillary Clinton. Then there was the allegation that Russiagate was basically Russian bots were taking over Twitter, and it was ruining political discourse and subverting elections all across the world. Then there was people who were saying that Russiagate was the infiltration of Russia into our media and pushing propaganda through Russian assets like RT, Grey Zone, etc. Some people say that Russiagate was the lib freakout of Donald Trump, people saying that Donald Trump was Putin's puppet and that Trump did everything Putin wanted. Putin would freeze us and all that jazz. Some people say Russiagate was a hoax. Some people say Russiagate was completely validated. You see, it's kind of a million things at once. The only consistent things that seem to be universal are that it involves Trump and Russia. The ins and outs seem to be debatable. Even many people seem to debate certain things regarding it. You'll see some people parrot one point of Russiagate, but then immediately dismiss another point of Russiagate. Now, depending on your ideology, you might have also had various different perspectives on Russiagate. if you were a Democrat, in the sense of like just being a Democrat, you would more than likely be generally supportive of the idea of, well, yeah, Putin definitely rigged the election in some capacity. But if you were basically anything else, you met it with more skepticism for many different reasons. One of the biggest ones seemed to be that it was just basically cope. Basically trying to take all of the blame from the election loss away from Hillary Clinton and put it basically all in the basket of Russia. Russia did it. Basically every other thing that was a reason that Hillary lost the election, it didn't matter. The Electoral College, didn't matter. Hillary Clinton refused to campaign in the swing states, didn't matter. The information that was in the WikiLeaks, doesn't matter. Anthony Weiner being caught, sexting minors, basically leading to Comey to reopen the investigation because they had to look into his laptop to figure out what he had. And lo and behold, that led to him wanting to continue the investigation right before the election. You can ignore that part. The Democratic Party generally shifting further and further to the right, making people want to shift to a more populist message, and being fooled into believing that a right-wing populist like Trump would actually be able to accomplish good things for America. Ignore that. You see, it was basically all the actual legitimate problems with everything else in possibly getting Hillary Clinton to lose, that immediately disappeared over like, oh, Russia did it. It was Russia. And this thing seemed universal because there were a lot of other elections and stuff that were blamed on Russiagate too. People blamed the results of the Brexit referendum on Russia. People were trying to blame AMLO being elected in Mexico as possibly being Russian influenced. People went to blame the Ohio District 12 race on Russia, even though there was literally nothing Russia could have done to influence a basically safe red seat to be safe red again. People looked at the issue that this basically turned everybody against WikiLeaks. Even the people who claimed to be super diehard WikiLeaks supporters all of a sudden hated him now, because it just so happened that the information that was leaked was from a politician that they quote-unquote needed to win. The Russiagate stuff basically came off as incredibly McCarthyistic, especially considering people seem to really be stuck in the Cold War mentality and the risk of saying, like, he's Comrade Trump. Also, to a degree, it became a little bit of a homophobic thing when it was like, Trump is eating Putin's ass, and like, people are like, oh, how does Putin's sweat taste like? And it's like, why are you getting weirdly homophobic? There'd be jokes of like people would draw comics of like Trump, and then his mouth would not be covered in the like spray tan, and then it'd be all over Putin's neck, and they'd be like, Trump, are you in any relation with Putin? He's like, no, I'm not. Russian asset talk basically seemed to be used to push people to the wayside. You disagree with U.S. foreign policy in any capacity? You're a Russian asset. You express support for people like Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and Chelsea Manning? You're a Russian asset. If you criticize the Democrats in literally any capacity, you're a Russian asset. Particularly focusing on the left, people use this as a way to push like the Greens into the forefront again. Jill Stein helped rig the election for Trump, despite the fact that Jill Stein was literally bankrolling for recounts in certain close states because she was trying to make sure Trump didn't make it to the White House. And not just that, people who were trying to push for issues that would actually try to circumvent all the problems that Russiagate supposedly brought up seemed to kind of get pushed out of the wayside. People were trying to push for paper ballots to circumvent machines being rigged, but nobody cared. Ranked choice voting to possibly eliminate the spoiler effect so that something like this couldn't happen again, even if there was a massive influx of Russian bots to support a personal candidate. Maybe it wouldn't be a factor because then that candidate's votes would immediately go to a candidate that they would probably vote for, but who cares? Another one would be if Trump was helped by Russiagate and like Julian Assange, why did he immediately then turn around and go, hey, Julian Assange should be gotten back here so we can try him? Because he immediately, when Trump won, Assange immediately turned around and started leaking information on the Trump admin, because that's what he does. Those are all the stuff that was brought up during like the 2019-2018 era of like basically every progressive YouTuber kind of talked about this to some capacity, especially considering emotions are high, because not only are they blaming Trump, a person that we don't like, but they're also trying to put the blame on people that we do like, Bernie and Jill Stein. But now that things are so far removed from what actually initially happened and all the feelings have kind of died down, we can kind of start talking about things a little bit more objectively. Look at the other side and see what's going on over there. And I guess we'll start off with one thing that basically kind of infiltrated the anti-Russiagate side, which is weird, and you'll see why in a minute. Reality Winner. For those who don't know, Reality Winner is a person who, while working for the Pluribus International Corporation, she leaked a report to The Intercept showing that Russia had hacked into voting rolls for an email phishing scheme. They didn't influence the actual votes that these people did, it was merely just to get their emails to be put on email lists. Since Reality Winner leaked this, she would then be arrested. Now, for some reason that I don't even necessarily quite comprehend, there were people on the anti-Russiagate side that were like saying like, oh, Russiagate's a hoax, Russiagate's bad, blah, 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 that were saying free Reality Winner, and they were putting Reality Winner in their hashtags, and it's like, wait, I thought you guys were saying that this was a hoax, but this person who is literally leaked information that potentially shows that it wasn't a hoax, all of a sudden you're super pro them? I guess technically it's the principle of the leakers, to which I say, I guess that's commendable. But it seems one of the biggest focuses throughout the entirety of the Russiagate stuff was the Mueller report. For those who don't know, the Mueller report was a thing that was supposed to basically detail, it was an investigation, a report of an investigation that was done by Robert Mueller to basically conclude what were the ties that the Trump campaign had to Russia. It was supposed to detail like everything. Many people were holding it up as like the sacred cow, like this would be the thing that would get Trump out because it would detail everything. And as such, the media spent a lot of its time hyping up the Mueller report. Like, oh, the Mueller report will reveal everything. This is gonna get Trump. This is gonna get Trump. This is gonna get Trump. So much so that they literally, like, when the Mueller report was going to be released, many news media outlets were literally hyping up the Mueller report being released and even broadcast them printing the Mueller report because they hyped it up so much. Unfortunately, it didn't quite pan out in the way they expected. You see, since the media had hyped it up so much, people were literally expecting that when it would be released, that it would show like Trump had purposefully called Putin and said, hey Putin, can you rig the election for me? Okay. But then it didn't quite happen in the way they wanted it to happen. Since the media hyped up their idealized version of Russiagate so much, that literally every other smaller aspect of it would not be taken as quite legitimate. And after the Mueller report was released, Trump basically paraded around saying, hooray, they proved nothing, I'm exonerated. And that was mostly done because of one of the earliest lines in the Mueller report. It did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, which is the thing that the media was very extensively trying to push. They were trying to push that it was Putin who basically directly influenced the election to be done in this capacity. In fact, that part was hyped up so much that another line that says, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion was basically overlooked. Because the conclusions that they ended up reaching were not the ones that they wanted. They wanted a direct connection between Trump and Putin, when in reality, nothing was basically done to directly link the two. And people sat there and debated on like whether or not it was like, oh, they were doing this specifically to cover their tracks. But at the end of the day, that's not what ended up happening. Like, they didn't have a one-to-one connection like the media kept hyping up. So instead of it coming out as a win, it kind of came out as a loss, even though if you actually look into it, it reveals a little bit more than you realize. One big revelation was that a Russian oligarch by the name of Yevgeny Prigozhin, also known as Putin's chef, used the Internet Research Agency, which is a troll farm, to impersonate conservative groups, LGBTQ groups, black rights groups, and religious groups as a way to sow discord. It also showed that 170 contacts between Trump's team and Russian officials were there. It revealed that WikiLeaks got the leaks from the main directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. You see, it was that first part that was really the big issue. People were saying that they were wondering if he committed a crime, and the report technically showed it didn't. Ergo, he can't be tried because there was no evidence that he committed a crime. And we had liberals go around basically saying, like, well, I mean, basically the reason why is because he covered his tracks. And it's like, I mean, maybe, but then again, it doesn't, like, he didn't commit a crime as it says. Even if Russia did it, there was no evidence that Trump pushed them to do it. I mean, Trump himself is known for his, like, half-hearted, like, flirting, essentially. Like, I mean, Trump is basically sort of like the guy who tries to flirt with a girl, but then he clearly wants something, but he won't directly ask for it. Wouldn't it be funny if we, like, held hands and kissed and became boyfriend and girlfriend? Haha, JK, unless, I mean, come on, I mean, unless you want to. I mean, no, I'm just joking around with my pal here. I mean, unless you're serious, I mean, come on. People were saying, like, that was what Trump was doing with Russia, but there wasn't really any evidence of that being the case. Now, there were also a lot of questions that kind of went unanswered, and I don't know if this leans pro or anti anything, but there were some things that technically tied into Russiagate that weren't necessarily answered. The first one I'm going to get into is one that I've talked about a little bit. Julian Assange made an appearance at the Green Party National Convention, which was very surprising because Assange is not an eco-socialist by any means, or a leftist by any means, so it makes no sense why he would appear at a conference for the Greens. And Jill Stein was even quoted as saying she had no idea how this event came to be, which shouldn't make any sense considering she's the presidential candidate of the Green Party. She should have at the very least some idea of how they were able to get Julian Assange to appear. And I was like, does that prove anything? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Another one seemed to be, this isn't really an unanswered question, but it was sort of like this general weird thing that I only started noticing recently. It's when people complain about Russian assets. It's like, yeah, we're complaining about a Russian asset about a person who's not a Russian asset, that's one thing, and we should definitely call out people who are claiming people are Russian assets when they're not. But then, people get mad when you call out people who are actually Russian assets. Like Lee Camp. Lee Camp literally worked for RT, and he was an actual Russian asset. People have literally quit RT because they wanted to openly support politicians and not have to file as foreign agents. This is like an actual thing that has been a long-standing principle in the United States, but of course, if you try to label RT as Russian state media, you're now quote unquote a McCarthyist when you say that, I mean, Russia today being banned in some capacity seems to not be that much of a bad thing. All of a sudden, McCarthyist. Like, even though RT is literally Russian state media. And then people also get mad that you want to make sure misinformation on the internet can be fact-checked in a good capacity. All of a sudden, oh, you're trying to help the oligarchs. No, I'm actually trying to stop the Russian ones. Like, banning direct misinformation, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Oh, but what if you are labeled misinformation next? Well, that's different. If they're labeling a political ideology a piece of misinformation, then that's a bad thing. But no, I'm not purposefully pushing misinformation. You're saying this to me talking about someone who is posting things like vaccines cause autism when that's a literal piece of misinformation. when people who are part of Russian state media get banned from social networks, and people getting mad like, oh, you'll be next. No, I won't be next because I don't work for Russian state media and I never will. Banning somebody for expressing a political ideology is vastly different than banning somebody for being a literal asset of a state media apparatus. And here's the thing, there aren't that many people getting banned about this. Lee Camp still has a Twitter account. He's just labeled as Russian state media because his show was Russian state media. He was getting a paycheck from Russia. Speaking of paychecks from Russia, remember Tulsi Gabbard? She got money from a Russian oligarch. It's weird. That's a weird thing, but you can't acknowledge that fact because Russiagate. In fact, while we're on Eastern Bloc countries, remember the Trump-Ukraine thing? Where Trump withheld military aid from Ukraine unless they would give information up on Hunter Biden? Because that thing kind of came back into public eye after the whole Russia-Ukraine situation. If Trump doesn't rely on Eastern Bloc leaders to give information on his political opponents to get elected, then why did he do that with Ukraine? That one was like incredibly more blatant than anything about the Russiagate situation. Maybe he got desperate. Now all this is well and good, but here's one of the big things. Russiagate has been over since 2020. Why the heck am I making a video about it now? Well, for one, I kind of decided to make it as a final hurrah, hopefully. But also, for some reason, there are a lot of people who don't want to stop talking about it. One of the problems with Russiagate nowadays is that people won't shut up about it. And here's the thing, it's not the people you think it is, or at least the people that you wouldn't think back in 2018. See, in 2018, a majority of people might think that MSNBC would be the ones that were still talking about it. But no, this time, it's flipped. Now it's Jimmy Dore, Nico House, Aaron Matei, Social Sameh, and people like that who are talking about it nonstop. These guys basically just do a big circle jerk about Russiagate, basically saying, we were right. Like, why should you listen to the MSNBC when they were the ones who wrong about Russiagate? We were the ones who were right about Russiagate, and that's why the media is trying to shut us down. And it perplexes me because all throughout the time that the media, like the MSNBC was talking about Russiagate, they were the ones who were parading around, like, stop talking about Russiagate. We need to start talking about more important issues. But now that the media has basically been done with Russiagate since 2020, these guys all of a sudden won't shut up about Russiagate. So anyways, tomorrow is the 5-year anniversary of Russiagate. What are the final conclusions we can reach before we can officially close the book on this chapter? Did Russia try to sway our elections? More than likely. Did the government of Russia try to click the Make Trump President button? No. Did Trump try to egg them on to do it? No evidence. Were there actual political reasons that made people want to vote for Trump? Yes. Did Hillary Clinton ultimately lose of her own accord? Yes. Is Jill Stein a Russian asset who tried to influence the election? No. Did WikiLeaks know that Russians gave him the information? Inconclusive. Did the information WikiLeaks released deserve to be out there? Yes. Did WikiLeaks withhold information on Trump to only crap on Hillary? Leans no. Does Assange deserve to be in jail for this? No. Did the media put too much energy into this? Yes. Did the media exaggerate the extent that this shaped our politics? Yes. And Russiagate. It's complicated. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles in Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.